So Battle Chasers is pretty cool. You got this great art style, really cool, satisfying attack animations, an interesting crafting system that lets you put in more ingredients for the chance of better stuff, the overcharge meter, which lets you conserve that mana, that precious, precious MP, and some really good tunes. However, I want to ask why some people don't like this game, because there are some people out there that think the game, while it's good, is not really that great. And the thing is, it's the battle system. Now, it uses the classic turn-based battle system, very closely resembling Final Fantasy X. In fact, let's talk about Final Fantasy, because they're kind of the problem here. Like, they started all of this. Because back in '87, when the first Final Fantasy game came out, they used random battles and turn-based combat more out of necessity rather than actually wanting to. The NES couldn't process enemies on the field or the engagement of number battles in real time. Which is why for their combat, they basically stole everything from Dungeons & Dragons. Like, a lot of things. And then when they got the processing power, they stole even more. Now this kept people satiated for a while, but the thing is, all you're controlling is a menu in a game of greater than or less than. Which is why later games in the series would engage in the active time battle system, but even that got boring eventually. Leading up to Final Fantasy 15 just being straight up full control action the whole time. Because not only do they have the processing power to have enemies on the field, you can seamlessly transition into battle, and you're able to do actions based off of numbers, but now the system can calculate those numbers fast enough for it to be seamless, and you don't have to go to a second screen. Of course, people still harken back to turn-based, and Final Fantasy has gone back and revisited it, but they realize now that the combat, again, can't evolve too much, because combat is based a lot around numbers. And if your game's based around numbers, your game is based around grinding at a certain point. And they realize that grinding in turn-based is boring, because again, you're just controlling a number, which is why they introduced auto battle. Because if your numbers are so big, fighting enemies is not worth your time, because you can just swipe the floor with them and not have to worry about it. So you, with the push of a button, bam, you're done. 12 was built completely around this. 15 doesn't have an autoplay because, again, you're in control the whole time. So you're engaged in that way. And with turn-based, they've made many strides to try to keep players engaged, such as the default and Brave system and Bravely Default. Unfortunately, I think the limit here is Grandia 2's battle system. Grandia 2 is really good, by the way, please buy it. It's on PC, where you had your menus and your turns, but you also had to keep track of location on the field and when enemies were moving so you can interrupt them, so it always kept you on your toes. And it always felt super satisfying when you get that last minute hit in to delay an enemy's attack and cancel it. Unfortunately, Battle Chaser doesn't have any of these things. Their combat is straight out of Final Fantasy X, and grinding in this game is boring, because EXP gain is slow, and the combat gets even slower when you're fighting the same enemies over and over again, and you can't just fast forward through it. You have to go and enter every individual commands to fight these guys, and there's not enough new elements introduced fast enough. They don't ever really play with the combat system. The game also has this weird balancing where when you're same level as enemies, you don't do that much damage to them. You're all kind of on an equal playing field, which means each individual battle feels like a slow grind, like a real struggle. Like, I've been stuck on regular fights rather than bosses, because I'll be fighting enemies that raise their attack power every turn or every time they get hit, and my characters just don't have the damage output to do so because their abilities are just weak. And I can't grind for this because there's no strong enemies around. They're all in these dungeons and they're there once. And you can replay dungeons, which is a cool system, I guess, but the rewards for doing so aren't that great. And enemies don't really increase in level that much to make it worth going back. Now, fights in this game with new enemies are interesting because there's new strategies, especially the bosses. But getting there can be boring because, again, you have to fight the same thing over and over again to get strong enough to do so. And when doing the same thing over and over again is this samey, well, we have a word for that, and we know gamers' feelings on it.